as enlisted, qualified on submarines, then went back, got his degree, went back and qualified on submarines as an officer. We won't hold that against him. So I introduced Robert.
Well, that was a simple introduction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real pleasure to be here. It isn't often that one can get together with a whole bunch of guys who think like you do. You know what I mean?
You just say that because it's true.
It's like this. And these things here. That's the thing. I want to start this off by setting the tone. The latest book that I wrote, Operation Whiteout, I'll talk about it a little bit later, talk about it. But this book has a disclaimer in it, and I thought that by reading this disclaimer, you might get a sense of where I'm going. Yes, on the sub I was on, we did some of the stuff we did, and we didn't do some of the other stuff we did because if we did do it, it was secret, so we didn't really do it, even though we did, but not really. Those medals me and my shipmates got when we didn't get for doing what we didn't do that we did. I really got those, except not. But yeah, that's because we never went where we were, so we weren't there where we were. And even though we weren't where we were, we did do the stuff we didn't do, but we weren't there not doing it. As for what boat we were on when we did go there on it, and did do the stuff we did, well, not doing that either. Apparently, I'm not supposed to even mention the USS Teuthus, SSNR-2, because I guess I'm not allowed to refer to the Teuthus for security reasons, so I won't do that. Mention the USS Teuthus, SSNR-2, I mean. The other stuff, it's okay for me not to mention that too. So the bottom line is that, well, we weren't on the USS Teuthus, SSNR-2, which I'm not going to mention, not doing what we were doing where we weren't. We didn't do that either. I hope this clarifies things for you. This is from the diary of Test Operations Group team member, Petty Officer First Class Lodek Slowski, following the successful completion of Operation Whiteout by USS Teuthus and crew. So with that, let's look at reality. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I was born in 1942. There's some of you that are a lot older than me, but most of you aren't. And by the time I got out of high school and was going to college, the astronaut program was underway, and by darn, I wanted to be an astronaut. But to become an astronaut, you had to be a jet pilot and a test pilot, and I had some eye problems and couldn't make it. And then I looked at what the Navy had to offer because the Navy seemed to be the way to go. And there was a program called NESAP, Navy Enlisted Scientific Education Program, and I figured, well, I'm a smart young guy, I could probably make that program. And so I joined the Navy, volunteered for submarines, and ended up on the USS John Marshall. And when it came time for me to apply for the NESAP program, the Navy, in its infinite wisdom, changed the qualifications, and I had to wait another year before I could even apply. I got lucky eventually. I got sent to the University of Washington, got a degree in marine physics and meteorology, went back into the submarine service, and ended up on the USS von Steuben. Now, I was at the head of my submarine class, my commissioned submarine class, and so I got pulled out early because they needed to have Poseidon weapons officers, and I ended up the first Poseidon weapons officer in the Navy. I missed the entire communications portion of submarine school, and I'll give you one guess what the skipper made me when I went on board the lesson. I was the comm officer. I had nothing to do with the missiles for quite a while. But again, we understand the Navy. That's just the way things are, right? So I was designated for something called the Nuclear Weapons Officer Program. Now, all of you know that if you're a commissioned officer on a ship or a boat, the idea is you want to command the darn thing. But you can't command a nuclear submarine unless you went to nuclear submarine school. But I didn't get to go there because I was designated for this brand new program called the Navy Nuclear Weapons Officer Program. And so I wasn't slated for command, and not being slated for command, I wanted to get out of that so I could get into something that I could eventually get command. But you couldn't get out of submarines then, unless you volunteered for Vietnam. And so I did. And I was out of there 6 months later. I was sent to El Paso. I learned Vietnamese. And then the war stopped. And so my detailer called me up and he says, Robert, I got this really cool billet for you. It's in this country called Laos. I said, where's that? He says, well, it's over there somewhere. I said, I don't speak Laotian. He said, well, that's okay. We'll teach you. And then I said, well, who am I going to relieve? He says, nobody. I said, really? Did something happen to him? Where is he? Who is he? He said, we don't know. He disappeared. And I said, okay, Lord, let's take another look. Let's see if you can't find something else for me to do besides go to this country called Laos at the end of the war. On and on. So they parked me, believe it or not, at Navy recruiting in El Paso, Texas. Yeah. It was actually kind of an interesting billet, primarily because my skipper was an old ASR commanding officer. For those of you who don't know, ASR is a submarine rescue. And he had nothing to do with the brand new catamarans. He was a real old ASR skipper with the leg, the 4-point moors, and the whole thing. And I had him over to the house, over to the apartment one afternoon. We got to talking a little bit. And he says, Robert, what is it you want to do in the Navy? I mean, you're stuck here. And I said, well, to be honest, I'd really like to get into the Man in the Sea program. He said, you would? I said, yeah. He says, well, I can pull a couple of strings for you. And the next thing I knew, I had orders to diving school. That was fun. I was the only commissioned officer. I was 10 years older. I had to take my rank off when I went into the school, and boy, did the guys have fun with me. But anyway, went through the school, ended up going through saturation diving school, and then after an additional year of vetting, I grew up in Germany, and I had a friend write me from Germany and say, are you in trouble? The FBI has been over here asking me questions about you. Well, eventually, I was placed in charge of something called the Test Operations Group. Now, I'm going to diverge a little bit to give you guys some background. Before all of this happened, a Navy commander and his son were out in Chesapeake Bay fishing in a rowboat, and he happened to notice off on the shore over there was a sign that said, cable crossing, don't anchor here. He started thinking about this. He's saying to himself, you know, I'll bet you the Soviets have signs that say, cable crossing here, don't anchor. And I'll bet you there's some interesting stuff happening in those cables. And he worked his way up through the Pentagon, constantly being set aside and pushed aside, spent an awful lot of time sitting in chairs outside of captains' offices, but eventually he made his point, and the Navy instituted a program. Now, how many of you have heard of the DSRV? Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle. How many of you know what its depth capability is? About 6,000 feet. How many of you know how deep any of our submarines go? It ain't that deep. And I'm not allowed to tell you how deep it is, but I think all of you know anyway.
Just ask Robert, he kind of remembers.
Well, another thing, those of you who are nuke sailors, you know where you sailed your submarines, and it wasn't in the littoral areas. It was in areas where the water was what, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 feet deep. So if the sub went down, how the hell was a DSRV that only had a 6,000 foot capability going to do anything about it? Well,
Guess you asked why.
the reason for the program was so that one submarine called the USS Halibut could go to sea with what looked like a DSRV on its stern, but was in fact a saturation diving chamber. And they could go into the Sea of Okhotsk and look for that little sign that said, "Don't anchor here, cable crossing." Okay, hold on. Good. The dog issue's fine. So, the idea was that the USS Halibut, with this fake DSRV, could go to sea, and that trawler that all of you have seen sitting off of San Francisco, sitting off of San Diego, sitting off of Norfolk, sitting off of New London, it would simply report another submarine rescue test ongoing. I had no idea. Well, I was put in charge of the test operations group, which is Navy speak for underwater spooks. And our job was to go onto the USS Halibut, go into the Sea of Okhotsk, which is between Kamchatka Peninsula and northern Siberia, lock out on the ocean bottom. After we found the cable, we'd go up and down the Kamchatka Peninsula till we found the sign, follow it out into deep water, and then lock out of the submarine and tap into Soviet underwater communications cables. Now, I think most of you know that this happened. It was first reported by Sontak in Blind Man's Bluff quite some time ago. That kind of opened the gateway, and it was possible for other people to talk about it and write about it, and so on. Well, the story of Operation Ivy Bells. I'm not here to pitch books. Well, in a sense, I am. I want you to buy my books, but I'm here to tell you a story. The story is told in Operation Ivy Bells, and it's told from the point of view of a precocious young naval officer who used to be enlisted. No names are mentioned as such. All of the names in the book are fictitious, but the personalities are all there. What I did was took this guy and that guy and blended them together and then created a personality, and it goes through the entire operation, what happened, the ups and downs, the dangers, the near disastrous things that happened. Now, you probably heard that at some point we had to stop doing it because a retired Navy chief working for NSA decided that he needed money, and he turned the entire plans of our operation over to the Soviets for a mere $33,000, which is just unbelievable. If you're going to do it, get several million. Goodness. The other participants in the program was the USS Parchi and the USS Seawolf. The Parchi was nearly caught by the Soviets while she was down on the bottom. She barely escaped. The program continued in other places in the ocean, but the program in the Sea of Okhotsk, which had absolutely clear communications going from the submarine base all the way down to Vladivostok, it was at an end. And if you go to Moscow, to the Maritime Museum today, if you can brave that country as things are right now, you will find the pod that we attached to that cable sitting in their Maritime Museum with a big sign on it that says "Made in the USA." So that once this program was over, once I completed my obligation there, I had an opportunity to move across the lines to the NOAA Corps, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Corps. And I switched my commission to the NOAA Corps and ended up involved with diving activities, in charge of diving in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in the Gulf area, and saturation diving we did a lot of. And then I ended up at the South Pole for a year conducting atmospheric research. That was absolutely fascinating. For those of you who don't know, the South Pole is on a plateau at 10,000 feet. So it's cold, the atmosphere is thin, And there were 17 of us who wintered over at the pole. That in itself was kind of fun, but having been a submariner, I kind of understood how it goes, and with a few people, and you find out how you get along with, and those that you don't, you just kind of avoid a little bit, and everything works out fine. I finished out my career and went into business for a while, and became a stockbroker for a while, and then finally I started writing books, and that's what we got here now. So I told you about Operation Ivy Bells. The fellas in Operation Ivy Bells, uh, who knows what a SOSUS array is? Almost everyone. Okay, it's an acoustic array that can give you a line of direction to a vessel, submarine or surface vessel, at very great distances. Uh, I could go into the technical reasons why this works because they're picking out sound that's way below the noise level. But the bottom line is that during the Cold War, we had SOSUS arrays all over the North Atlantic and the North Pacific. In the second book, Operation Icebreaker, uh, what my guys do is go up into the Arctic to lay a couple of arrays in the Arctic because the Soviets figured out they couldn't come south through past Iceland because we were detecting them, and they couldn't come through the Bering Straits. At least it was difficult. So we put arrays off of Greenland, west of Greenland, and north of the Bering Strait, and that's what this book's all about. It takes place in the ice pack, and a lot of underwater diving, underwater espionage work related to Soviet submarines. The Alpha submarine, which was one of their most advanced submarines with a titanium hull and a special metal cooled reactor. The third book talks about the Soviets having to abandon one of their Alpha submarines and our guys taking it over and bringing it through the Arctic ice pack back to Electric Boat in General Dynamics on the East Coast. The final book in the series, Operation Whiteout, from which I read that disclaimer before I started talking, is about operations off of Antarctica. We had the North Atlantic covered, we had the North Pacific covered, but we did not have the South Atlantic and the South Pacific covered, and this is putting arrays down there and the problems that they get into and having to deal with Chi-Com submarines, and this takes place just after the Falklands War, and the Argentines had got some pretty effective diesel submarines from Germany, and they get involved with that as well, and the story for a submariner is just carries forward with a great deal of interest. Now, a few months ago, I was going through my email and I came across a series of stories by a guy I knew, Jerry Pate. He was a second-class sonar technician on the von Steuben when I was his fledgling sonar officer, and we lost touch. And then regained touch many years later. But these stories were absolutely fascinating. Now, I know that everybody here knows somebody who can sit down in a bar and over a glass of beer can just keep you fascinated for hours at a time with storytelling. Well, that's Jerry Pate. And I told him, I wrote him and said, Jerry, you got a book here. He says, you got to be kidding me. I said, no, you really do. And so I compiled his stories, worked with him, and we came out with a book. And you notice it's called Submariner because there's so many people that call us submariners. We wanted to get the point across. We're not. We're submariners. And this book has become a bestseller. And I brought it along today in case some of you would like to experience the nostalgia of being back on the diesel boats and then transferring over to the missile boats. He spent a lot of time at NO2. He was there when at the Challenger disaster. He brought back a lot of the parts, a lot of the wreckage from the Challenger disaster. And talks about it. It's all in the book, and it's fascinating. So anyway, that's what I came here to tell you about, and I want to open the floor for questions at this point. I'll take any question. And
what year was Ivy Bells?
Ivy Bells took place in the very early 70s.
And exactly how you tapped in And then you had to keep retrieving, right? It was like a recorder.
Yeah, it used induction and recorded the information, and then we or one of the other subs would come back and periodically would pull the information out and take it back for analysis. By the way, you remember Reagan's summit with Gorbachev in Iceland?
Yeah.
And remember how it kind of fell apart and Gorby left? Well, there was a reason for that. We had picked up very clear indications that there was a potential coup happening in the Soviet Union. His equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff they were going to take him out. And we got this information to Reagan, and he told Gorby, and Gorby went home to take care of business. And that's why Reagan and Gorbachev were such good friends, because Reagan saved his life.
So did you actually do any of the diving?
Oh yeah, yeah. The cable was at 450 feet, and we would lock out. We'd be at saturation mode and then lock out and do what we had to do. Initially, the halibut didn't have any skids, and we hung her off of anchors fore and aft, and that turned out to be kind of difficult because the water, the weather, the Sea of Okhotsk is really, really difficult. And at one point, the submarine was undergoing hanging, say, about 380 feet, undergoing such vertical motion that we snapped one of the anchor cables. Divers had to go out and repair that. We ended up going to Guam, getting skids put on the bottom so the submarine could be set right on the bottom and then made heavy so it would stay there. And that solved a lot of the problems we would have had otherwise. So,
You know, I can't remember Ed's last name. And he died a couple of years ago.
Ed Baker.
Yeah, he was what was
Ed Baker.
Ed Baker.
Ed Baker.
Did you know him?
Ed Baker. The name is familiar, but I think
He was an officer. He was a saturation diver on Parchi.
uh-huh.
And he actually was down retrieving information off a tap. And somehow or another, Parchi settled on top of him and crushed him. And it basically destroyed his life physically because he was quite invalid from then on out.
Well, he ended up getting a stroke.
Yeah, he had a stroke.
And Dan Kostovan was a friend of his, who was also a
Yeah, Danny Kostovan.
saturation diver. So we have a little bit of experience.
But he was a member of this base for many years until he passed away, 3-4 years ago?
About 5 years ago.
About 5 years ago.
Fast.
Ed Baker was probably one of the most amazing people in the world I've ever spoken to.
Served on a Seawolf.
And yeah, he was on Seawolf too. But that was the one point I wanted to make. But the other point involved the John Marshall. There's no modern SSN or SSBN that's ever gone deeper than the John Marshall.
I was on board John Marshall when that happened.
Well, I'm talking another event on Christmas Eve '73.
Okay.
So we went deeper than any other boat. There's only two SSNs that went deeper, and neither one of them returned. So that's just a little point.
When I was referring to, I was a sonar tech then.
Yeah.
We were coming out of the med. And for those of you who don't know, the way the med is structured physically, the physical oceanography, you got a layer of water, ocean water from the Atlantic that flows in on the surface. It warms up in the med, sinks down, gets salty and heavy, and then it flows out below the water that's coming in. And the Soviets had a couple of trawlers sitting there trying to keep track of who was going in and who was going out. And so our SSBNs would float in with the current, undetectable, and then float out with the current, undetectable. Well, we had a long patrol, and we decided not to float out. And so the ship was trimmed heavy because the water was heavy. We were trimmed for neutral buoyancy in that water, but it was heavy. And we're pushing hard. And apparently what happened, there's this huge waterfall that underwater that goes all the way to the ocean bottom. And oceanographers have studied it for years. Well, we had firsthand experience with it because we poked through the surface of that underwater waterfall into the light water, tilted to about this angle, headed for the bottom. I was sitting in sonar at the time, looking at the depth recorder, and I can tell you that we went way below test depth. We didn't go to crush depth, obviously, because I'm still here.
I won't get into the details because it's a long story, but it was Christmas Eve '73. Dropped a rod, no idea why. Lost propulsion. We were in the middle of a equalizer charge, so we had almost no battery left. Our depth excursion, and I'll say it was 1,836 feet. And many of us know this. Spent 5 days on the surface, dead in the water in 70-foot seas.
Isn't that fun?
Diesel
I got
was-
a
diesel
better
was flooded. The diesel was flooded, so yeah, it was a bad time.
I don't think I can top that as a submarine story. Yeah. You were going to ask a question.
Yeah, I just wanted you to explain a little bit more about your, what was it called, diet? What kind of diet?
Saturation.
Saturation diet.
Okay, just for the. How many of you are scuba divers? A lot of you. Most of you understand that if you stay down longer than you're supposed to, you have to decompress on your way up. And if you don't, you come down with the beds, right? Well, if you go down to, say, 66 feet or so, that's 2 atmospheres, and you stay down there long enough, your body will have absorbed all of the nitrogen that it can, all of the inert gas. At that point, you are saturated. You can stay there as long as you want, and the decompression time will be the same. So that's what saturation diving is. One wouldn't normally do it to 60 feet, but if you breathe a mixture of helium and a little bit of oxygen and some argon, I've been down to 1,000 feet, and it takes about 10 days of decompression to get up from 1,000 feet. So does that answer your question?
Your diving suit that you wore for that, it was a walking suit?
No, you're talking about the gym suit, which is a 1 atmosphere suit. The suits that we had were hot water suits, and we had an umbilical, and gas and hot water was pumped through the umbilical. We were experiencing ambient pressure. The gym suit's a 1 atmosphere suit, but we were at ambient pressure, so whatever depth we were at, that was the pressure we experienced.
Did they use a closed cycle?
Some breathing, it depended on what we were doing. You didn't need a closed cycle if you were on the umbilical. They feed the gas back. You don't want to lose helium, so it gets fed back. But there were times when we had to go with a rebreather completely, and then it was all parsing. And for whatever it's worth, that's explained in detail in the books. Yeah, back there.
So, did you have to stay in the compression chamber the whole time? Ship the submarines down there?
I'm not. If you are subject to decompression, yeah, you got to stay in the chamber until you have reached 1 atmosphere. The submarine, of course, is at 1 atmosphere, and then you can come out.
Okay.
But depending on the operation, if you had to saturate, say, at 600 feet, you were going to be about 6 days, rule of thumb, coming to the surface. So you had to plan activities and repairs and other things around the fact that you couldn't get out of the chamber.
Okay.
When I was on the Dogfish, we went to the Mediterranean. We went through the Straits of Gibraltar at 2 o'clock in the morning. The captain had armed the torpedoes and loaded the tubes with armed torpedoes. I was a starboard lookout, and I counted about 100 contacts on the starboard side. And on the port side, there was at least 100 contacts, all coming through.
Now imagine what that's like when you're a sonar tech
Yeah.
and you're trying to distinguish the difference between all of those because you can't see what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets pretty wild.
So we understood why we armed the torpedoes.
Dennis?
The code name ID Bells, where'd that come from?
That's a very good question. I don't think anyone's alive anymore who knows. But it was a good nondescript thing that didn't say anything about what was going on.
I heard it beat out one ringy dingy.
No, I was telling you that the program was a cover. We had two mother ASRs. They were catamaran ASRs. They each had two saturation diving systems, one in each hull, and either one of the ships could carry both of the DSRVs. And we worked with them. We worked with the motherships, and this whole thing. And this was all done in order to convince the other guys that we had a legitimate program and there was nothing to worry about. And we were so convincing that while I was at the submarine development group in San Diego, a Japanese captain and his entourage came over to investigate our system with America's approval so that they could build a similar system to rescue people out of their submarines, and they didn't think their way past the same thing that most of our guys didn't think their way past either.
Did you ever work with NR1?
Yes, I have, but only peripherally. It was a cool sub.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Was there any visibility at all?
Sometimes. Now, and it depends on what you define as visibility. Often, that was good visibility. We went up into the northern part of the Sea of Okhotsk. There's an area up there where the Soviets they would fire their test missiles and they would drop into the Sea of Okhotsk and down to the bottom at 600 feet. And what they didn't know is that we were down there picking up the pieces and packaging them up and sending them back to the NSA. And the water was really clear up there. That was an amazing thing.
That's the decompressor chamber. That's separate from the boat. In other words, you could be in there, and the boat could be going where you want. You're pressurized separate.
No, it's attached to the boat.
Oh,
And in fact, you get into it by going into the engine room and up a hatch into it. And the dive panels were right there.
but if you were decompressing, you could be attached to the pressure of the boat.
No, it's isolated from the boat with hatches.
That's what I'm. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's physically attached.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is the pressure is isolated from the crew.
Exactly. Now the DSRVs, of course, we worked with those, and the thing is all tied together, and they were a lot of fun because they were kind of like little spaceships moving through space, and it was really fun to take them out and put them down on a sub or bring them up to one of the motherships.
How did they support you for your 6 days or 10 days in that?
Well,
obviously
there's a small lock called the medical lock, and we pass fluid through the medical lock. When you're down more than about 500 feet, everything tastes like cardboard. It doesn't. You can put as much hot sauce as you want. It's cardboard. So yeah, but they fed us, and there's a sanitary facility. And you had to really be careful with those because you did not want to have 500 feet of pressure suddenly be pulling your guts out.
Yeah.
That happened with someone.
I've always been curious as to why the Navy abandoned Avalon and the other DSRV.
Mystic.
Mystic.
Well, why did the Navy abandon Avalon and Mystic? Because they had no useful purpose. They never did, other than as the cover. And the program for which they were a cover was gone. It had been compromised.
So the idea of a DSRV is a bunch of
Yeah. You know,
It's like
you've been on nukes and you know where they go, and And typically, you get out over the 50 fathom curve, and the next thing you know, the bottom's 10,000 or 15,000 feet. And if you go down there, there's no DSRVs not coming along.
It's like the idea of having a stanky hood on a submarine.
Yeah.
It's totally useless.
They changed it to size suits that were rated to 600 feet, and they tried it on an English master diver, and he blew all the capillaries in his eyeballs and everything else.
Yeah.
So as even when I was doing escape training, they're like, it's rated to 600, but you're just gonna die.
Your pressurization time in a chamber
Yeah.
to get your body up to sea pressure would blow out everything.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. It's like everybody from 2010 on, he was like, we just died. They have these nice orange suits to make you say to your parents, you're going to come back safe.
That's what they were.
You know, it's like the boats that have sunk on it and with the cables, you know,
Yeah.
welded shut when you leave because, you know, it makes too much noise.
Couple more questions?
So, were you ever involved with the Alpha or the Mystic?
Yes, I've written both of them.
So a torpedo man on my boat, the Subvet, went Mustang and became the commander of both of those.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
What was his name?
Tim Pulse.
Yeah,
Yeah, Commander Pulse.
I know his name.
Yeah, good guy. I got a good story about him, but it's off subject.
Anybody else?
Well, so you know, everything on a submarine, supply parts are stored in little pukas all over the boat. And the store keepers, whatever they call them now, LSs, they go to all these different places. So down in lower level machinery space or torpedo room, I needed a part. A-gate was probably an O-ring. And he had to reach down between a couple of torpedoes in lower level torpedo room to open this little puka to get it. And the little SK was a short arm guy. Well, Tim Pulse was long and lanky. He got down in there between two torpedoes and he's getting my parts.
Oh, no.
Well, what happens when you hit your head? You go the other way. Well, there's a torpedo in the way, and he hit his chin, and he went back. He cycled about 6 times in between there, and he retired with his little man.
Okay, just for your information, the books I've been talking about are all over there, plus a couple of others that you might find of interest. I'm not trying to get you to buy books, but they're there if you're interested. I'm happy to sign them. And it's my great pleasure to be your newest member. And I got to pay my dues.
Well, we appreciate. We'd like to present you. Well, thank you, Alan. That's the USS Colorado Challenge.
Okay.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break for water and